Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place.
Thank you for listening to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today I'm speaking with Morgan Koegel, CEO of One Girl. We chat about One Girl's mission and community engagement strategies, and Morgan's experience coming on board as the organisation's second CEO at the age of 24. Thanks very much for joining me, Morgan.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
So let's start by talking about your personal background and your interest in the not-for-profit and social enterprise space. What led you there, and why is it the work that you do?
You know, one of the first questions I always get asked when I go out to do talks or when I'm doing interviews is usually about my age. So how is it that I'm a 25-year-old CEO? That's usually people's first question. And I have to admit that to answer that question, I have to go way further back than the CV, than the traditional listing off of what have been my other roles. I have to go all the way back to the start,
Excellent.
Which is my upbringing and you know who I am. Something that's kind of different about me is that I was actually raised in an untraditional home. I have two mothers who raised me in the early 1990s in a time and a place in Middle America where having lesbian parents, and in particular lesbians having a daughter, was so unusual. But you know, growing up, it wasn't even something that occurred to me that my family was different, that my family wasn't the norm. And it wasn't until I was about 5 years old that I was confronted with this. Because after all, I had, these two parents, and my father is a gay man. So really, I had this whole collection of parents to choose from. And I was loved and supported and sent to a really good school. But when I was 5 years old, I was on the playground one day and I heard two kids arguing. And one kid said to the other kid, "That's so gay." And I remember standing there, hearing that and thinking, what does that mean? Does that mean that they think gay is bad? Does that mean that they think gay is weird? And I desperately wanted to speak up and say, no, my moms are gay and it's fine. But I couldn't find those words. I was scared of what those students might say to me. I just couldn't find a way to express myself. And so I just sunk back with this sick feeling in my gut of not being able to speak my mind, not being able to speak out about something that mattered to me. And I decided then and there, 5-year-old, whatever I was going to do in life, it had to be somewhere where I could find my voice and speak out about the things that mattered to me. So for me, it is so much further back than everything else that's led me here. It was that moment in time I can really pinpoint it.
And what have been, I guess, the intervening things you've learned, experiences that you've had that have, I guess, before we start to talk about One Girl and the work that it does, that have led you to be interested in that area or generally in not-for-profits or charities providing services? So
when I was a younger kid, one of my moms actually worked as a lawyer. And she used to come home at the end of the day and tell me her lawyering stories. And she one day shared with me the story of sparing a man's life who was on death row, because this was in Ohio in the 1990s. And I remember as a 7-year-old hearing that and thinking, oh my gosh, this woman got a law degree. She spoke out about the things she believed in, and she literally saved a guy's life. That's it. That's the thing you have to do good in the world. And so for a long, long time, I thought that my way of changing the world, of using my voice, was going to be as a lawyer. And I did. I got my law degree at the University of Melbourne. I raced my way through school to get there. And I enjoyed law. I enjoyed the intellectual challenge and the academic rigor. But what I really liked was it gave me an opportunity to work in the courts, to work in prisons for 2 years in an environment that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to touch. And so while I was there, I was feeling so motivated, and I did love what I was doing. But I was constantly confronted by how slow the law is to create change. And if I could go back, I would give advice to my younger self that being as impatient as I am as a person, the law probably isn't the right career path to try and change the world, because I was just constantly beat down by how slow it was. And so something that really stayed with me in that period of time was working in prison. And I was doing these legal education seminars and thought I was doing pretty well. I had this guy who'd been back again and again and again. And I was thinking, gosh, Jamie loves my sessions. He keeps coming back. And it was about the 11th session that I realized I hadn't brought enough pamphlets. I'd run out. And I said, sorry, guys, I'm going to have to print more. And Jamie, this guy who'd been back time after time, said, you know what, miss, you can have mine back. I actually can't read. And I felt again that sick feeling in my stomach, that confrontation that, of course, he was coming back. I was pointing to slides he couldn't read. I was probably using words he couldn't understand. I was giving him things he couldn't read. And it was the first time I'd fully understood that my capacity to read, write, even just speak like I'm speaking right now is the product of the education I've had. That my education has been everything in my life. And here was an environment, prison, where only 7% of men have a year 12 or equivalent education. And that is so much a part of the disadvantage that they're experiencing. And it was there that I thought, you know what, the law's been great to me, but no, I have to move my attention. I have to be in the education space because that's where you're able to create real, lasting, systemic change and quickly.
Wow, wonderful. So I guess it's a great jumping off point to talk about One Girl, your organization, and the work that it does.
For sure. So One Girl is a unique organization that is incredibly female focused. The thing that I love about working for One Girl is it kind of brings together these two interests I have. I've spoken about education. That has absolutely been such a huge part of my life, of my advantage. And the other half of that is that with a name like Morgan, which is quite unusual, a story I like to share is that my mom's actually chose this name because it's androgynous. You wouldn't know if I was male or female before you met me. They had both experienced discrimination from being women and thought that that was a good initiative, that somebody could read my CV and not know if I was male or female. And I see that all the time now as a young woman. I'll go to meet people with a name like Morgan and a title of CEO, and they'll say, "Oh, you must be Morgan's assistant." And I'll say, "Oh, no, I am Morgan herself." And so this kind of idea of gender inequality and that the experience of being a woman, no matter where you are in the world, developed or developing, is going to affect the course of your life, have always been with me. Those two things combine perfectly in this organization because what our aim is to educate 1 million girls across the developing world. We work in Sierra Leone and Uganda. We're sending girls back to school. We're working in the menstrual health and hygiene space, as well as building toilet blocks at schools and providing girls with financial literacy, business entrepreneurial skills where they can't be in school. And so there's that combined focus of trying to create an environment where girls can learn and can be safe from the pressures of teenage pregnancy, early marriage, but on top of that, using that education as a platform to a better society for those women and the people around them.
Wonderful. So that's quite a big aim for the organization to have. And I guess you get there in gradual steps, but I'm interested in talking a little bit more about, I guess, the practical operations and in how it is that you go about achieving those aims. What's the kind of funding situation of the organization or its business model?
So we have a pretty diversified funding stream in terms of where we get our money from. We are completely community-based in that we have ongoing donors, we have businesses that give to us, but far and above, our biggest source of income is a peer-to-peer campaign called Do It in a Dress. So it's this simple idea that people here can put on a school dress, choose a challenge, do their challenge in a school dress, regardless of gender or age or any other factor, and through that, be able to fundraise for girls to be able to put on a school dress in Sierra Leone or Uganda. So it costs us $300 a year to put a girl back in school. And so we ask people to set themselves that target of stretching themselves outside of their comfort zone, maybe jumping out of an airplane in a school dress, running a marathon. We've seen people do all sorts of crazy things. And that actually makes up a huge part of the money we're able to use as an organization to put girls back in school and provide all of our other programs.
Wonderful. I have noticed this campaign, and I'm sure it's something that quite a few of our listeners are aware of. And it seems like you've really tapped into that community engagement that can be a real strength to these types of organizations. Can you tell me a little bit more about your strategy with this and how it is that you, I guess, continue to engage people year after year?
I'd say there's kind of three factors in answering that. The first is, unlike a lot of charities, we have an incredibly young supporter base. We know that most of our supporters are 15 to 24, which is unheard of in the development space. And so that's something that's really important for us to tap into, not just in terms of what the campaign looks like, but also the comms that we put out there. So the way that we talk about the work that we do. That's something we're always focusing on and trying to make the campaign feel new and fresh and exciting. And we have a lot of schools get on board, a lot of universities, and that's something we really embrace. But in terms of the two major success elements of this campaign, I think that helps us stand out and is a big factor in why we're growing so rapidly is firstly our ambassador program, where we ask ordinary Australians and even around the world, people to apply to be ambassadors for the Do It in a Dress campaign, One Girl ambassadors. That group of people take this and run with it. We provide them a bit of training in fundraising. We give them the opportunity to kind of see the inside of the organization. And ultimately, they go on to raise almost half of what we're able to do as an organization with the Do It in a Dress campaign. I consider them one of the most important elements to our success in this campaign. I would say the other thing that's quite unique about Do It in Address, and we see people come back year after year at a much higher rate than a lot of peer-to-peers out there, is because it's not restrictive in terms of what you can do. You're not being asked to do the same thing twice. You can put on the dress and do a completely new challenge the next year. Even we just see that in the office in terms of, I have office mates who one year might run a marathon and then the next year run a movie night. I know that for me, last year I ran 25Ks on my 25th birthday, instantly regretted the decision. And this year instead, I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to have my community donating and daring me to do different things. So you can make it feel fresh and new to your supporters, to your family and your friends, even if you're doing the same campaign again, which I think is a huge advantage as a peer-to-peer, where we know a lot of different organizations out there will admit that they have trouble getting someone to come back for the next year or even many years later.
Wonderful. And in what ways do you engage this community with your organization's mission and with the impact that you're having in this area and the impact that their contribution is having?
Something we're quite lucky with is that we actually have a dollar handle that we can point to. So while all of our programs cost different amounts of money and there's so many things to be taken into account, we do know that our scholarship program that puts girls back in school costs $300 per year per girl in terms of paying for her uniform, her books, her bag, her shoes, and all of her school fees. We have additional things that we add into that program. For example, we provide pads so that girls are able to go to school even when they're menstruating. We provide extra classes, but fundamentally the core of that program is $300 per year. And that's something that's really motivating for our community. We find that people like to attach their goals. For example, the ambassadors aim to raise $3,000, which is the equivalent of educating 10 girls for a year. And then around that, the community can really understand the tangible benefit of what they're doing for the organization. So we definitely try and mix up our comms. We try and teach people about all the different programs, but we know that people are super, super motivated by the idea that, yes, I've educated one girl. Yes, I've hit 2 girls. Like, it's been a really great motivating force for each and every person who takes part in that campaign.
Interesting. And so the other programs that you run, I saw a few of them on your website that were quite interesting. Are they funded in a different way, or is it just that you kind of focus a little bit more of your fundraising efforts, particularly on that area because it particularly engages people?
It's a whole mix, but we often find that with some of our other campaigns, for example, Business Brains and Launchpad. Business Brains is around financial literacy, entrepreneurship training for women, and Launchpad is around menstrual health and hygiene training and provision of biodegradable pads in Sierra Leone and reusable pads in Uganda. We find that often, for example, business donors or philanthropists are really attracted to the specificity of those programs. And so we're able to have a conversation around particularly funding a group of girls or a part of that program. And that's a huge benefit. I think that Launchpad, as an example, it's not the sexiest program, but I love talking about it, going out and being like, hey, let me talk to you guys about period. And people get excited around that, talking about this fundamental barrier that exists as a difference between men and women that is keeping girls out of the classroom, that is meaning that women have worse health outcomes. So it's not something that in development we often like to talk about. It's a little uncomfortable, particularly for the men in the audience, but it is so, so important. And there are a lot of women and even men out there who hear that and say, that is so simple. That's something I want to be a part of. And I don't care that it's not the sexiest program. I want to be a part of that.
Now, I understand that you have partners in carrying out some of your on-the-ground operations. And so I was wondering if you could talk us through some of the factors that you consider when arranging or establishing these partnerships, just from the perspective of someone who needs partnerships in their own organization.
I think that a lot of organizations are increasingly moving towards the partnership model, which we've done in part. We do have on-the-ground staff who are local people in Sierra Leone and Uganda, and then we work with partner organizations to help implement some of these programs. And that works really well, to be able to work with community-based local organizations, grassroots, that need our support to be able to take things to the next level. So in terms of what we look for, first and foremost, it's for a like mission, an organization that wants the same things as us in terms of the overall goal. And I'm not talking there about this, fun, exciting goal that we have of educating 1 million girls. I mean, fundamentally thinking about our theory of change and that the way we approach women's education in general. Beyond that, we then kind of look at what they're already doing, and we have a really thorough process for evaluating where that organization is at, their capacity to work with us, their capacity to build something that is culturally, locally sensitive to the needs that exists in that community, so that we're able to work together to ensure our program isn't just kind of parachuting in, but it's actually working from the ground up. And that's been something that I've really enjoyed working with all of our partners on, and been consistently impressed with how much we share in common with a lot of our partners as we go through this process of sharing what is our child protection policy, for example, what is our policy about taking photos of girls. Something that people often comment on when they look at our website is, hang on, everybody is smiling on your website. You have photo after photo of a girl who is smiling. Why is that the case when you're telling us these terrible statistics that a girl is more likely to be sexually assaulted in Sierra Leone than she is to attend high school? How can you have photos of her smiling? And that's because we have a really strict policy on how we represent people, that no one is a victim, and we will never use a photo that we wouldn't be happy to share with that person and say, hey, is that you? Are you proud of that representation? Whenever we look at a photo we've taken, we say, would I be happy to be represented that way if someone had taken a photo of me? And so when we have kind of attitudes towards the work that we do and the way we represent people that are that stringent, we have to make sure that our partners are on the same page, that they're going to understand why we communicate things in a certain way and why we have such strict questions about certain aspects of the program.
Now, we've spoken a bit already about the aim of educating 1 million girls. I'm wondering, looking into the future, what your vision for the organisation is, either more generally or more specifically working towards achieving that goal.
Something really important with that goal is the caveat that goes with it. So if I say it externally, sure. But if I say that goal in the office, I would always add the caveat without ever compromising on quality to get to quantity. Specifically, that we have programs in place that are a very long end game. If we were just racing to get to the 1 million girl goal, we wouldn't offer scholarships. When we commit to a scholarship with a girl, she's usually about 12 years old. So we're committing to working with her for usually 6 or even 7 years to get her all the way through high school. We only get to count her as a participant in our program once. So it would be a terrible, terrible economical calculation to try and get to 1 million girls that way. But we know that the impact of committing to her for that period of time is massive. And so we're not compromising on the quality of education that she receives in order to race towards that goal. And so it is a pretty slow movement towards that goal. Currently, we've been able to work with over 18,000 women and girls in recent years, but obviously we've got a long, long way to go before we get anywhere near the 1 million. I often get asked, what's next? And I say, ask me in 5 years' time, because then we might be talking about that 1 million girl goal. In terms of how I want the organization to grow, something that I'm conscious of is we are really reliant on do it and address. It's a huge part of what we do. It takes up a lot of our time. And I want to make sure that we're working towards having more sustainable sources of income so that we can budget more effectively year on year, so that we have more to rely on. And for me, that's kind of going to be the next few years, is just doing all the consolidation work that allows for that to happen in years to come.
We touched on earlier the fact that you're quite a young CEO and you've only been in this role about a year. You replaced the original CEO and founder of One Girl, Chantel Baxter, and I thought it would be interesting to hear from you what that transition was like, both for you and for the organisation, to the best of your awareness.
It's interesting because this is actually my second run of being a CEO of a not-for-profit. And in both cases, I have taken over for a founder and stepped into the role to manage the team. And both times I've felt really lucky. And honestly, I think this is something that both of those founders would acknowledge, in that their strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. And that's something that's quite nice for an organization that's just gone through this massive startup growth. And that's definitely what One Girl's seen. The growth has been and is still massive year on year. And so then for me coming in, and I think that a huge part of me as a manager is kind of thinking about that consolidation, thinking about how we can make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves, how we can consolidate on that growth, that coming in at that startup phase is quite helpful to level things out, to get the team together, ready to head in on that. I mean, other than that, though, I'm quite lucky in that at One Girl, I inherited this incredible culture. Our office is completely female, not by design, but just by chance. And there's this incredible community of sharing and togetherness and teamwork around being this empowered group of women of all different ages fighting for this shared goal. I've never been part of a team in all my years professionally or even studying at university where people are normally working towards the same thing, where everybody feels so on the same page and so together in that goal. So I'm quite lucky that I don't have to do a whole lot to create an office environment where people want to be part of it, where people want to work harder to take this to the next level.
Now, you mentioned you've had a previous CEO role. Could you tell me a little bit more about this and perhaps how it's different than your current role in terms of what's expected of your leadership skills or what kind of influence you have over the organisation?
Previously, I was CEO of Engage Education, which is an Australian not-for-profit that is aiming to keep young students, usually year 11 and 12, in the classroom, regardless of their socioeconomic status or their geographical boundaries, for example, if they're living rurally. So what that meant was trying to create a higher standard of education for people who couldn't necessarily afford big, expensive seminars that are run by the big companies or access some of the best online materials that you might get if you're a student in a metro region with all the money to spend on education. So my role as CEO there was really, really operational in terms of making sure that we were managing this team of young people. I was 20 at the time, and that was about the age of my team, to be able to manage such a huge lot of work. We were running seminars for thousands of students. We were producing online materials that were accessed thousands of times. And so there was a lot more nitty-gritty in that role than I have now. I think One Girl, while there is to an extent a lot of operational work, here I have a slightly bigger team, and my team has a lot more time to spend on it, where I'm kind of overseeing to a bigger extent. I'm kind of over the top of the team, ensuring that everything is running as it should, which hypothetically, and I do hope in the future as we continue to grow, gives me more space to think about the big strategy stuff, to actually be able to sit back and think what's to come in the future, which I think is something that can be quite hard for a CEO who's quite operational, that you sometimes miss the forest for the trees. Definitely a lesson I'm learning and definitely something I'm working on.
What professional or personal development advice could you give to someone who was interested in leadership that might prepare them for a role like this?
You know, when I applied for this job, I was 24. I knew I was going to be up against people who had 10 or 20 years on me and probably 10 or 20 years more experience than me. And I think that would have deterred a lot of people. In fact, I know it would. I often tell people to apply for something, for example, a volunteer role at One Girl, and they'll say, oh, no, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm like, I'm the CEO, and I'm telling you you're ready. Please raise your hand for that opportunity. And I think that there's a lot of talking ourselves down, saying we're not ready, thinking that somebody else is going to have more experience. But you've got to start from a position of, actually, if I'm passionate about this, that's enough. That was what I came in and said. I know I'm young. I know I am, to some extent, inexperienced compared to some of my competitors. But what I lack there, I make up for in passion. And that passion, that drive, that cannot be bought, it will always make you work harder and work better. And so that's really the selling point, is raise your hand before you are ready and explain and be able to prove that you are desperately passionate about that role and about that cause. That makes all the difference.
I guess it's really key in this particular industry as well. Potentially something that wouldn't be as important in other industries, but is maybe more of a consideration here and probably for the better.
Absolutely. I mean, you're obviously not choosing your role for a salary or for the perks or anything like that. You are choosing that role because you think you can do that really well and you care. You care about that. A huge part of my job is going out and speaking about the work of One Girl. And I'm so lucky that with an organization where it's about gender equality and it's about education, I don't have to write these big speeches. I literally just go out and talk. I'm like, let me talk to you about the things I care about. These are the things that I talk to my mom about at night. It's the things I go home and tell my partner. These are not unusual things. They're not things I have to think about really hard to get passionate about. It's simply just sharing something that's in my life.
Now, in winding up, I thought I could ask more generally whether you had advice for anyone who maybe not necessarily a leadership position, but is interested in becoming more involved in some way in the not-for-profit or social enterprise or for-purpose space? Where should they start?
I think the first thing you have to do, and I can't emphasize this enough, is do some self-reflection. Actually sit back, look in your gut and say, what is the thing that doesn't sit right with me? Not everybody shares the same passion. There are plenty of not-for-profits that I would be a crap CEO of. I would not have the passion or the skills to lead there. So you have to really find the one that sits well with you. And it's okay if you have multiple passions. It's okay if there's multiple things in your gut. But normally when you sit back and do that examination, you find that there is something that really stands out, and that's the area you should be aiming for. I cannot believe the number of times I've given talks and I ask people, look in your gut, raise your hand, what is the thing that's there? What's the thing that doesn't sit right with you? And there'll in particular be a lot of young women who will say, oh, I've never really thought about it, but I'm really passionate about feminism, or I'm really passionate about the environment. I'm passionate about climate change. Once you find that thing, everything else slots into place. You don't have to worry as much about how am I going to break into this sector, this industry, because it's no longer an industry. It's a cause. It's a drive. It's a passion. And you can focus on that and all of the organizations and opportunities that exist within that stream. It really makes it a lot easier to narrow down what the next step is.
Amazing. And so I always like to finish up by giving my guests the opportunity to give a shout out to an organization or a social entrepreneur whose work you're currently finding interesting.
This one's kind of easy for me because part of being a member at One Girl is that I have this incredible board above me of people who are really, really involved in this space. And one of those people is Charlie Syme, who is currently managing a little organization called B Corp. And he looks after everything at B Lab that has to do with ensuring that companies who want to be recognized for being good social forces for change are actually doing that. And I think that that is so amazing. You know, part of being in a charity, which in many ways is recognized as a dying sector, is that you have to be aware of what's going on out there about social enterprise, about cooperatives. And I love that I've been introduced to it by the work that's being done at B Lab to kind of get Australia on board with this movement that has become so big in the US. So definitely look out for that one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Sproutcast today, Morgan. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
And vice versa. Thanks, Julia.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.